It is 2024, and welcome to the brand new Armstrong Williams Show. Joel and Bruce are back with us, two of my favorite guests, and I welcome you in 2024. I'm glad to see that you both make it. Joel, let me start with you. What is the future of cryptocurrency this year?
You know, the cryptocurrency markets are some of the most volatile in the world. We see intraday price swings of 5 to 10% quite often. So making a prediction about where exactly the price level might end up next year is not something I'm going to engage in. But I will tell you this, there's many people that have flocked to cryptocurrency because they have lost faith in the fiat money system. Nearly each and every year, our dollar, no matter what the fiat system you're using, that loses money almost each and every year. We've seen that accelerate over the past few years with inflation. And for that reason, a lot of individual investors are going to continue to explore the possibility of putting at least part of their savings in something like cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, for instance. Whether or not that will indeed hold its value any better than fiat currency, the future will have to tell us that. Just one side note on that, we see a lot of governments that are restricting the use of crypto, including on the exchange platforms. We saw Jamie Dimon, the CEO of one of the world's largest banks the other day. He actually said if it were up to him, he would outlaw cryptocurrency. And what that suggests is that there is a danger for those that are holding on to Bitcoin, that there will be more government regulation of possessing it and trading. If that happens, that could negatively impact the price.
What do you think is the outlook after coming in now into 2024? Because 2023 was just a volatile stock market. I mean, what a roller coaster. What can we expect of the stock market this year?
Well, what we do know is that the economy seems to be slowing. We have seen jobs growth stall out. Even though the top line numbers are great, the number of full-time jobs since June has actually declined by around 10,000 nationwide. And if the economy does indeed slow down in 2024, that could really put the clamp on corporate earnings. And that's what really drives the stock market acceleration. Right now, we've got the market near the year highs. But what's really interesting is that if you look at the past 2 years, the market is basically flat, but adjusted for inflation, that means that if you're invested in overall index funds, you've actually lost about 25% of your overall value. So if we do indeed see the market slow in 2024, that would not bode well for market results.
You know, let me stay with you some more. I want you to put the almighty dollar in perspective. We've seen all kinds of different entities from Iran, Russia, and China trying to create their own fiat currency. Is the dollar weak? And it seems as though no matter what happened in 2023 with the economy, because other markets and other economies are so much in the toilet, the dollar still remains strong. What is the future of the dollar being the global currency, and how long can that last, and what threatens it, and what also strengthens its viability?
Yeah, so since World War II, the U.S. dollar has been the primary currency of choice for international trade and for foreign governments who hold money in reserves. And that's because our economy has been second to none. We have seen the demand for a dollar decline over the past several years. First decline because we've been using our dollar as a tool to push forward our foreign policy objectives, whether it's sanctions on Russia or sanctions on Iran. And I actually think that's a positive that we are able to use our financial system rather than our actual military, because that means fewer loss of lives. But that has also caused regimes worldwide, including China, to seek alternatives to using the dollar for trade and for holding on to reserves. So that has resulted in the dollar as a share of all global reserve currencies to plunge to multi-decade lows. But second of all, the fact that we have used our Federal Reserve to print trillions of dollars to fund government spending, and to buy government debt, that also has weakened our dollar. It's a big part of the reason why we saw the highest inflation in 40 years. Now, as you referenced, it hasn't been as bad in this country as other countries. That's because governments across the world have acted rashly and irresponsibly. But because we have long-term entitlement programs that have not been addressed, the long-term prospects are for a continued weakening dollar because politicians have done nothing to remedy those ills. And that suggests that we're going to once again resort to our printing presses of the Fed in the years going forward. That's going to weaken the value of each and every dollar that we hold.
Give us a brief lesson in 2024 where you see inflation, hyperinflation, and deflation.
Well, we have seen the inflation rate level off, but of course it's still at much higher levels than where it was just a few years ago. And I think regardless of where that inflation rate goes next year, it's not going to do anything to actually eliminate the real pay cut that families have experienced because of the sky-high inflation. That's about $5,000 per family of four that we've seen in reduced real income. And I'm not confident that the Federal Reserve has this under control. There's already whisperings that the Fed will abandon its goal to get us back to 2% inflation, and that would keep us at closer to 3 or even 4% inflation. We have to remember, the way that we can actually increase middle-class incomes is for our productivity rate to actually increase, and to increase at a greater rate than that inflation rate. When you have all these government regulations that Biden has been piling on, in addition to this enormous government that just blossomed under President Trump, and of course President Biden expanded, that does not bode well for the families. And so while I don't expect a return to the 8 and 9% inflation rates in 2024, I don't anticipate us going back to the 2% that we were used to, and I don't anticipate us being able to close that big loss in income that we've seen over the past 2 years.
When we come back, we will get Bruce Fein's perspective. It is a presidential election year. It's 2024. We'll talk about the political class, and we'll also talk about the courts up next on this edition of the Armstrong-Williams Show. Will Hunter Biden be indicted this year? We saw the charges of him in December. Will it impact his father's run for the president? Will Donald Trump face the music this year in terms of all Georgia, Mar-a-Lago? There's a lot pending. And will the Supreme Court save him?
Well, let's try to unpack those seriatim. One, Hunter Biden. Yes, they've come back now with a second indictment the U.S. Attorney has from Delaware, charging him with several felony counts, 6 misdemeanor counts for evading income taxes, filing false returns, claiming, among other things, $200,000 as a business expense for
sexual favors.
For sexual favors, yeah.
Unbelievable.
Utterly preposterous.
Yes.
I mean, there's not any possible good faith defense.
Right.
And we know that basically he was a derelict. You know, he's been a derelict for decades, living like a child, drug addict, lying on his forms to get a gun, denying that he was in drug treatment program, which would have prohibited him from buying a firearm. So his trial is going to go forward, and the likelihood of a conviction, I believe, is overwhelming. Now, is that going to handicap Joe Biden? I think it will. I don't want to overstate that. You know, we've had presidents before who had brothers in problems. Billy Carter with Jimmy Carter, and Libya and Colonel Gaddafi. Richard Nixon had some brothers who had some problems with Howard Hughes. But it's certainly not going to be a benefit. It really underscores, I think, the disappointment of the general public in seeing that you have an elite political class in Washington that plays off of their power, association with power. So it's influence peddling is what's going on here, which caused great dissatisfaction, and feel we have a two-tier system of economy and justice. With regard to Mr. Trump, it's very complex. I believe that there definitely will be decisions in Washington, D.C., where they've got the January 6th prosecution before the 2024 election ends. The judge currently has a trial date of March 4th, and I view the most difficult smoking gun for Trump to refute is the vice president's testimony, which has been unrefuted, that on the morning of January 6th, Mr. Trump told him, you choose between me and the Constitution, showing Mr. Trump knew the difference between the Constitution and what he was asking the vice president to do, which was not count the electoral votes that had been certified by the states. And a corrupt intent is what's critical to proving the alleged violations of law. Now, you never know. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. A jury really, they call it jury nullification, come acquit anybody they want to. The jury deliberations are secret. But I think that's very likely to happen. It's the case that I think will reach a verdict first. The other cases are further down the road. The one, for example, in Georgia that you mentioned, the racketeering case, the fraudulent electors, that's not even scheduled for trial now till August of 2024, just a few months before the ballot. I don't think that verdict is going to come to a close. With regard to the Mar-a-Lago case, this is the Espionage Act, the misuse of presidential records or destruction of records, obstruction of justice. That's still not scheduled until sometime in May, and the judge there has indicated because it involves classified information that it could be postponed further. The one up in New York, this is the Stormy Daniels, paying for silence over his affair. I don't think that's going to be a substantial burden on a campaign. It's just, listen, everybody, it's like Clinton, It didn't matter whether he lied under oath. Everybody has sex with their underlings or whatever. I don't think it's true, but that was the kind of thing. No, I hope I don't, I'm not accusing you. But I mean, that was the kind of the defense that was have. Well, it was just locker room talk, and who cares? So that is likely also to be the kind of way the American people would receive that verdict, and that's not scheduled until late in 2024 either. So overall, I do think it looks grim in my judgment for Mr. Trump. He's trying to delay the trials by filing appeals. The gist of the appeal is what he said on July 23rd, 2019, and this is an exact quote, Armstrong. Then I have Article 2, where I have the right to do anything I want as president. Similar to what he said the other day, on day one, I'm a dictator. I mean, how much clearer can you get as to his contempt for the Constitution and the rule of law? So that's where we are.
The Supreme Court?
Now, the Supreme Court, let me talk about two cases first that I think are important, then the possibility that they might intervene in some of the Trump cases that are not that level yet. One, we do have the court taking on the efforts of state governments, both Florida and Texas, trying to control the ability of social media to censor viewpoints they don't like, okay? And in both states, they enacted laws that said, no, that there's certain viewpoints you can't censor based upon what the government thought should be given free speech protection. In one case, a court of appeals said that's unconstitutional, invades the free speech rights of somebody to decide what they want to promote and not. In the other case, the Court of Appeals said, no, it was constitutional. And the U.S. Supreme Court has taken this case. It obviously has momentous implications for the future of social media. There's a general proposition that the court has announced that you have a right not to associate with speech, just like you have a right to associate with speech. The famous case on New Hampshire, they required you to have a license plate that said, live free or die, and the court said you can't force that. But then go back, I'll speed up here. It's possible that the court would interject itself in many of the pending cases now that are percolating the state courts, trying to disqualify Trump from being on the ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. I think the court will say, we want to sit this one out and let it percolate below.
And we'll return after these commercial breaks.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion. and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Joel, I was listening to Bruce and I was thinking about, there will be another government shutdown looming, another deficit battle. How does our political class in this back and forth with this deficit issue weaken our standing around the world?
Well, it weakens our standing because investors worldwide are realizing neither party seems to be serious about actually addressing our long-term structural deficits. And as that occurs, you'll actually see less demand for our government debt. Well, when that occurs, that means our government has to pay more to borrow those resources. And something that's not getting enough press right now, the interest payments on our national debt just this year alone almost total what we're spending in total on our military. We're spending around $10,000 per family just on the interest on the accumulated debt. And that is set to grow far worse into the future. And as our nation is consumed with all the legal troubles of Hunter Biden and possibly his father and the legal troubles of President Trump, we're heading into what is a pivotal presidential election. And yet we are hearing almost zero discussion from the leading candidates on how they will actually address these long-term structural deficits. And if we don't like what we saw the past 2 years with the inflation that was driven by all this spending, we need to remember it can get far worse. Look at what happened in Argentina the last few decades. It went from being one of the wealthiest countries in the world to one of the poorest in our hemisphere because they continued down a reckless fiscal path. We are headed down that path right now, and we have just a few short years to remedy it before the course correction will be far more painful.
I want to tell you, this will surprise you. There's one statement in 2023 that I haven't even talked about that really haunted me, that came from the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. And he said, if you don't fund Ukraine, your sons, your nephews, and your fathers will be dragged to battle on the battlefield of Ukraine to fight this war. I mean, did you read that? I mean, what was he saying? I mean, it sent chills down my spine. What was he saying?
He's trying to frighten, inflate danger to try to get money for Ukraine rather than for the American people. Now, he doesn't understand. Ukraine's borders, Russian borders have changed probably 100 times over the last centuries. We pointed out earlier, every border in the world is drawn by the sword. So and this idea that Biden has said, and that's the future of democracy turns on Ukraine, The same thing was said, the future of Fein.
But was he saying the interests of Ukraine outweigh the lives of our brothers?
Yeah, that we should go and fight for the Ukraine freedom because they won't do it. Which, of course, is absurd.
It is absurd.
Completely absurd.
Does his sentiments reflect this of the administration?
I think they do reflect the administration. Joe Biden says we got to get rid of Mr. Putin because he's a bad guy.
So they threaten Republicans in Congress that if you don't give us the money, we're going to draft your fathers, your sons, and your nephews to fight this war.
They're not going to draft. Don't worry. They'll just go to war on their own. And that's another problem here. Only Congress can declare war. We will end up being at war in Ukraine on the unilateral decision of Joe Biden and the Secretary of Defense, which is utterly crazy.
I heard, listen, no one's talking about it.
Yeah.
And this happened last year. It sends chills down your spine to think that the Secretary of Defense could be so bold to make such a statement. We'll be back with some final thoughts. Don't go away.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
So, Joel, what gives you hope as we commence this new year? Give us hope, especially for Americans who are struggling every day with just simple essentials.
Well, what gives me hope is that the American public is waking up. They're starting to connect the dots between the reckless government spending and borrowing of the past few years and the fact that we've seen our real standard of living decline by the largest in 40 years. And if we look to what's happened in other parts of the world over the past year with elections, look at Argentina that just selected a free market economist as their president. Look to what happened in the Netherlands, where a conservative won. Look to Italy, where another person on the center right won the presidency of Italy. I think across the world, people are understanding that the deterioration in the lifestyles the past few years, it's not because of businesses, it's the result of government action, and they're demanding accountability. And that gives me hope that going forward of this year, we're going to see a real debate between the presidential candidates about the best way to get our country back on track.
Any thoughts on the nominees for both parties in this year's election?
Dreadful. So, yeah. I mean, look out there. I don't see George Washington. I don't see Thomas Jefferson, Madison, John Quincy Adams. I think we really do lack statesmen anymore. These are not people who are deep and thoughtful, think about things like, are we saddling our posterity with $33 trillion in debt, and for what reason? And we're going to have our men and women and children risk that last full measure of devotion for Ukrainians, not for defecting and creating invincible self-defense at home, and understanding that the true greatness of the United States is the greatness of our individuals with innovation, with ambition, with industry, creating new jobs, marching to their own drummer. That liberty is what is our glory, not the armored knight. And that's what we're still looking for, unfortunately. And maybe it's a time to vote for none of the above. But get out and vote. Make it clear that you're still engaged. But if none of the candidates appeal to you, don't have to mark a ballot on that position.
You know, it reminds me that the first bullet fired during the American Revolution were by farmers.
Yeah.
And the best of America is always its ordinary people, not its political class that have grown greedy, egomaniacal, self-interest. They do their own bidding. Bob Menendez, we're still waiting on his fate. Nobody talks about him anymore, and his wife. Gold in his home, being traced back to gold that was stolen, that the mainstream media don't put a light on, don't focus on it anymore. America has lost so much trust in the political class, and they don't know what institutions to trust anymore, except everyday Americans will always be the engine, the fuel that continues the greatness of this country, because they're not corrupt. They're innocent, they're hard work, they make sacrifice, they invest in this political class, and what they get in return is little or nothing to show for it. I'm Armstrong Williams. Again, happy 2024. Thank you for watching this edition. Tune in for the next edition of this broadcast.